everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to our Building an Enterprise Level System with Xero series. Just going to give it a few seconds for everyone to filter through. So looking forward to speaking to you this morning and so excited for the Managing Complexity when Scaling Payroll session that we have coming up over the next half hour. Just a few housekeeping points. You'll see the Q&A box in the tools. Please do fire through any and all questions in there. We're going to do some brief intros to start. We'll then have our discussion with our fantastic panel. I'll then quickly cover what's coming up over the next webinars in the series. And that will take us to the full half hour. And then we'll have a bonus of some Q&A at the end. But look, let me go right into it. So my name is David Tuck. I am the co-founder and CEO here at Mayday. Our mission is to mend month end, starting with the needs of multi-entity businesses, intercompany recharges, cross-entity bank reconciliation, keeping intercompany loans in balance. I'm an accountant by training, so qualified at Deloitte, then became a two-time multi-entity Xero using Finance Leader. And with this series, really trying to create the resource I wish I'd had as a finance leader about how best to scale with Xero. I've been an accounting tech entrepreneur for the last decade. Previously founded Chaser, the accounts receivable automation business, and have been building Mayday with my co-founder Griff and our fantastic team for the last couple of years. And so just to frame today's webinar in the context of the series. So we're for larger Xero users. The majority are in-house finance teams of our customers at Mayday. And we kept coming back and finding they had two questions. Is Xero still the right system for me? And if yes, how long will that be the case? Indefinitely, or what will be the point at which I outgrow it? And the nature of uncertainty is that when we don't know, it leads us to act earlier. The ERP move is widely recognized as horrible and hectic, as one of our customers described it, incredibly expensive, and that's before 58% of ERP implementations fail. We've got this idea of ER peace of mind, the peace of mind of knowing whether and how long I can scale with Xero as my accounting system. This series is very much framed in the context of how can we be useful to our target customer. It's not product marketing. It's not about how to build a best-in-class app stack. There's a reason I'm not wearing a Mayday t-shirt for these webinars. It's about writing the misconception that it's not possible to move into your growth phase as a business with Xero as your accounting system. But we don't want to overcorrect. We don't want to replace one myth with another, that Xero is this all singing, all dancing panacea that any and all business can scale with for the remainder of time. There are times where it'll be right for a business to move to an ERP, and we want to touch on those as well. So that's enough from me. I'm so excited to be joined by Beth, Sabrina, and Dave for our webinar today. And so I'm going to hand over to them to do their intros. Beth, over to you.
Thanks very much, David. Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. I'm Beth. I'm head of finance at Silvera. We are around 160-person Series B startup in the climate tech space. We are a leading carbon data provider, so we independently and accurately evaluate carbon projects so that companies and governments can make sure that they're investing in projects that are having a real climate impact. And I am also a Xero user. I have been both at this company and at my previous company in a multi-entity kind of increasing complexity space. And so I've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about how we can continue to use Xero for as long as possible and how we make that fit the needs of our business.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Beth. Brilliant to have you with us. Sabrina, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sabrina, COO at Pento. We are a payroll startup based here in the UK. And I have the interesting role of sitting across not just engineering, but also finance and HR, which are kind of, the the various areas that touch on payroll. So I come at it both from like a user perspective. I run payroll for us here at Pento, and we are 0 users as well. Again, multi-entity, but as well coming at it from like a product perspective of how we can create the best experience for lots of other companies. But yeah, it's great to be here.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sabrina. And Dave, over to you.
Hey guys, obviously I'm Dave. I run a firm called Seagrove in the sort of London area, and I work predominantly with kind of early stage businesses, a lot in the tech space. I came from a background of being a head of finance of a few different sort of startups and founder-owned businesses. So I spent around kind of 5 or 6 years doing that. Been working with Xero since sort of 2013 onwards. So I've been in there pretty much for multiple hours a day since then. So know it pretty well. I've been running Xero. I've sort of been running, I guess, payroll since 2014 and started with Xero Payroll. So it's sort of relevant to this conversation. Yeah, I haven't scaled my firm. So my firm is actually just me. And there's a reason for that, which is a lot of my focus is also on this kind of vague area of innovation. So I have a sort of side project where I am working on creating a blueprint for the firm of the future, as I kind of refer to it. Really predicated on my view that I don't think that accountants are really, a lot of accountants aren't really inspired by what they do and trying to create a more inspiring human way of doing accounting. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Well, look, we're absolutely thrilled to have you all as panelists. Thank you so much. Yeah, really excited now to dive into the discussion today. First off, I'm just really keen to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page, really. What do we mean by managing complexity when scaling payroll? And Sabrina, I'm going to come to you for this.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different lenses through which you can look at complexity. I think the first potential layer of complexity is just scale. I remember at my last company joining as person number 7, and when you're just running payroll for 7 people, you can do 7 individual payments in whichever banking system one-on-one, and that's kind of okay. That obviously doesn't scale when the number of payments you need to make goes to 100, 1,000. So there is just the simple aspect of complexity of scale. There's also complexity of process, and that could be because you're multi-entity. It could just be as you mature as a business and you have more checks and balances. You may go from just one person being involved in payroll to having multiple departments feed into payroll, maybe multiple levels of approvals, maybe multiple different streams of work for the different aspects of managing payroll. And then I think the third and perhaps most unique to payroll element of complexity is just tax. Payroll ultimately is a way to pay the right tax on income. And as businesses grow and mature, what we often see is that they grow into the tax ecosystem that they're embedded in. Sometimes that's taking advantage of certain tax efficient schemes. Sometimes it manifests itself in more complex benefits. But that's kind of the other level of complexity that I would say is there. I think the first 2 are generic to most processes in scaling businesses. But the third is kind of a very payroll and tax specific element of complexity.
Fascinating. Well, look, that's such a great anchor for the discussion today. Where I'm keen to go first is Beth, Dave. Xero has its own sort of native functionality that businesses can use to address their payroll requirements. Before we get into the growing pains and what you can do with the ecosystem, what does Xero do well when it comes to payroll?
Well, I quite like Xero. I mean, I don't use Xero Payroll in my practice. I use a product called PayCircle now. But Xero Payroll for me was my first kind of introduction into running payroll. So sort of 2014 or 2015 or whenever it was introduced, I was straight on it, and I saw it as a quite exciting product really for me, because I always felt that payroll had been this kind of mystified area as an accountant, where it was like, obviously we outsourced that. Obviously, the HR department deal with that. And I, as such and particularly when I joined as a head of finance of a founder-owned business, I realized how integral that process was, how integral obviously payroll is to the business, and how much of the P&L that takes up, and how, how emotionally attached obviously employees and the whole culture of the business can be if it's done wrong or it's done right. So it's something I wanted to be close with. I felt that the experience with external providers was bad. So yeah, Xero Payroll for me is actually a really demystified tool in terms of it's easy to use, I think, in the way it's very similar kind of aesthetic and user experience to the rest of Xero. So a lot of the same themes kind of align in terms of, it looks pretty good, I guess. It looks clean, it's easy to use, it's intuitive. It's something that someone without an understanding of payroll can actually pick up and can use, albeit, we'll go on to reason potentially why that's not necessarily advised as you start to get, big as a business and you want to do that in partnership with an accountant. But for me, yeah, I think it's a good tool. You can get good reporting out of it, albeit it doesn't really have a very, very strong sort of API. It has some really good reporting out of it. It has an embedded kind of HR element. It interacts with tools such like Deputy for like timesheets and automating the data of sort of timesheet management through to the payroll, sickness leave. So there's a lot of great things about Xero Payroll. And although I don't use it, I spent a number of years using it as head of finance and found that it was a really intuitive tool to, as someone with no background of doing payroll, to pick up and use.
Amazing. And Beth, just from your side.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also don't use Xero Payroll and haven't done previously, actually. I think for me, I've probably been on quite a kind of stereotypical journey of lots of startups where initially your payroll is outsourced to accountants. I think a combination through either, perhaps you don't yet have an in-house finance team who are willing to take on kind of payroll themselves and perhaps view that as an area of risk and complexity, and also a very large time drain that is initially perhaps better served being outsourced. And then over time, when, we'll dig into this a lot more, I think, into the growing pains, but over time realizing that actually outsourcing isn't necessarily a solution that scales as well or smoothly as kind of as a company scales. And I think that can create lots of frictions and lots of other kind of complexities for the finance team. So I've kind of been on more of that sort of outsourced to in-house journey, and then as part of that, thinking around what is the best in-house solution to enable myself initially and now my finance team to be able to kind of smoothly and confidently handle payroll.
Amazing. Beth, I'm going to boomerang right back at you into the growing pains and the journey you talked about you've been on, and Sabrina framed it brilliantly for us with what we mean by managing complexity when scaling payroll. Would love to hear about what were the growing pains for you as a business when it came to payroll.
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned, I think what a lot of companies quite often do is they'll initially outsource their payroll. It'll be part of their kind of early stack when they're chatting to their accountants about what can you do for us and what do we need to do ourselves. And payroll will probably be one of those things that falls early on in the bucket of something that your accounting firm will do for you. And as the company scales, I think it can become increasingly challenging. One, because your payroll then basically lives in spreadsheets and emails. So you probably have an increasingly large spreadsheet with multiple columns for every single possible change you could be making to payroll. Depending on what benefits you might be implementing or how you want to label certain things on a pay slip, you've got individual columns for all of those things, and then tracking those variances if changes are happening, and thinking about kind of spotting errors, and then of course actually making changes, particularly at the last minute, can be really difficult when you're just handing an Excel spreadsheet back and forth over email with external accountants. So I think what I tend to see in that space is your payroll cutoff date gets earlier and earlier in the month because you want to give yourself as much time as possible to be sense checking that spreadsheet that's being handed back and forth. In that, you're probably also incurring fees for changes that you do inevitably want to make last minute with your accountants when you're bringing on new joiners and you don't want them to have to wait 6 weeks for their first paycheck. And so I think that, that's certainly a real challenge. And then added to that, I would say kind of more generally speaking, in startups, you tend to have like a move fast and break things. It's okay for there to be a little bit of a risk and for things not to be perfect sort of culture until it comes to payroll. Payroll is the one thing that I think all of us feel must be right. It needs to happen on time. People need to know what they're going to get, and it needs to be accurate. And Dave alluded to earlier, it's a very emotive and important part of both kind of dealing with employees, but also kind of handling the company finances. And so, I'll kind of pause there because I think I've like raised a couple of potential issues, but just kind of echo those points.
Some really good ones. Just quickly on those, Beth, just from my experience of being a head of finance, I always felt like, I agree with you, you're sort of putting numbers into a spreadsheet and then passing it to the account. And it just felt like you're obviously creating additional risk, but also like you're just duplicating work. And it just didn't feel like an efficient way to do things. It also felt like I don't really understand actually what they're doing. And obviously there is a technical element to payroll, there really is, particularly as she gets bigger as a team. But generally speaking, from my experience of smaller businesses, it's not particularly that technical. More important in terms of the information is right. And also you alluded to like the speed, when there are changes to be made, when there are problems, when there are issues in the team, it's like, how quickly can we resolve them? And if the payroll is close to the finance team, then it usually means that they can be resolved faster. Don't want them lurking around, members of the team, having issues with payroll.
Brilliant. So vivid. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like move fast and break things unless it's payroll is like a startup bumper sticker waiting to be created. So amazing. So we segue from that into, I'm really keen, we'll get into the discussion of what you can do with Xero plus the ecosystem. Just to briefly touch on it, from what we've talked about, any of those payroll pain points, are there any there that mean, Xero plus its ecosystem is no longer going to be viable for you, and it is a signal that your time has come to make the move to an ERP? So, from any of your perspectives, and Sabrina, particularly if you've got anything from your side here.
Yeah, it's I think with any of this discussion, whether you're talking about, whatever aspect you're trying to scale with Xero, whether it's payroll, whether it's a bolt-on for revenue recognition, whether it's a bolt-on for customized billing, I think it comes down to, someone once said to me, every company has a few things that they really invest in and a few things that they do cheap. But also, like, if you think of that in terms of like time investment, every company has a few things that are their particular complexities and are the things that are simple for them. So I think it's a question of like, where are you really, really complex? Like, and on like a long enough time frame, any business that grows to many, many thousands of employees just becomes complex along so many different angles. Just that scale element alone just grows. The process element alone grows. There will be a tipping point at which most companies, if they grow to be 10,000 people, are going to end up needing to go to an ERP. But it's a case of how many complexities live in your business, and how well placed is the integrated stack to be able to manage those particular complexities. I think once you get significantly overlapping complexities, so I don't know, in a situation where your rev rec and your billing is so tightly coupled and you've got really high frequency and scale, this is where something that can marry all those pieces up in a really native way becomes really valuable. From a payroll perspective, I think once you are like a true global multinational, and I don't mean like in the classic startup, you have like 2 people on an EOR somewhere else, but when you have many multiple offices across multiple sites, doing local payroll one-on-one is going to be difficult unless you have dedicated resource in those countries. Annoying answer, but it really, really depends. And it also depends on the capabilities of some of the halfway house tools that sit across multiple jurisdictions and to what level of granularity they can go into it. It also depends as well on your strategy as a business, whether you are immensely localized or you do try to keep things homogenous against, for example, lots of different jurisdictions. Yeah, I mean, payroll complexity comes from tax. Really, that's where you get things.
So is that, Sabrina? So from your experience at Pento, do you is that one of the key areas you see where clients will tend to move on from you into an ERP, but due to geographies, due to international expansion, and kind of like needing a system that can deal more sort of seamlessly with that? Is that why you're sort of alluding to it?
Yeah, I think, at the very top end, like many thousands of people, when you have critical mass in multiple jurisdictions, that's when something like a Workday for like, your HR and payroll ERP sort of tends to come up. But yeah, it really, really depends. Some companies are many thousands of employees, but because they're blue collar and, you can't really have a remote person working at a factory in Kent, and they end up like very, very localized, and it becomes less relevant. But I think if you have multiple large centers of payroll that you need to homogenize, that's really something that you can only do with an ERP.
Fascinating.
I think just quickly, a question just came up on I think Steve Jarvis asking about Beth about international payroll, but this is kind of relevant for that. I guess to some degree, Sabrina, do you see some of your clients at Pento work with the likes of Deal or Remote to kind of get around that in the interim? And I guess going back to just my view on this, I think with the ERP side of things, it's almost trying not to look for reasons why to use it. This is my opinion, and actually just kind of trying to make use as much as possible and not going to ERP, given the quality of cloud. And we might come on to that a little bit more in terms of why that's helpful. And then, really those pain points will become clear when they become clear. When they become clear that you can't use the current systems, then move, rather than trying to find reasons to move. But sorry, yeah, back to that, the Deal and Remote question with Pento.
So we do have like a lot of customers that also use EOR. So Pento is remote first. We use EORs for countries where we have maybe just one employee, two employees. Pros of EORs is, yes, they will sit across lots of different countries. You'll have one interface.
Sabrina, just on that EOR, what is that?
Employer of record. So this is when you don't actually have an entity, but say you want to hire a developer in Greece. So you can use an employer of record to employ them on your behalf. Advantages: simple, streamline, outsources some, but not all of the risk. Disadvantages: you pay for it. Like an EOR service is very expensive, and it does tend to sit at a lower level of complexity. If you really want to go in and deeply be able to kind of customize the benefits, the tax optimization in a geography, that's not really what an EOR is for. But it's a halfway house to needing to have an entity. It's something that we see a lot of tech companies tend to have, and knowledge work industries where it is possible for people to work more remotely and globally. And that often sort of sits as like a halfway house to that. But again, it's a lower level of complexity that can be handled. So, for example, in the UK, if you're in a point where, you're wanting to do P11D submissions in order to, influence the way in which benefits for employees are taxed, or if you are a blue collar industry and you have variable workers and you're subject to like the variable holiday pay regulations, these are things that are typically a level of complexity that your average EOR is not going to have. And EORs effectively operate in similar ways to Beth has outlined, as a tech enabled outsourcing more than anything else.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess if you have localized staff, like localized finance team as well, that's going to become like, well, why are we doing this? We're just sort of duplicating data again. It's another factor.
Exactly.
And then just to move into, Xero plus the ecosystem, I'm really keen to come back to Beth and your story of what you've been able to do at Silvera in scaling with Xero and a dedicated payroll system in Pento.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you alluded to, we are using Pento now, and fortunately, when I joined Silvera, like before we had any finance team, so I was the first finance person there. Our operations person at that time set up our Pento account, and so they had already kind of been managing payroll in-house, which I think is, if anything, that is a testament to how simple payroll can be. If you can have a non-finance specialist without payroll experience feeling comfortable that they can accurately manage payroll themselves in-house. It's not necessarily something that you would recommend to multiple businesses, but it is sort of testament to the kind of ease of use and comfort that something like a Pento provides. So right now we still use Xero, and we think that we've got lots of life left in Xero for us as a company as we scale, and tools like Pento enable us to just kind of massively streamline core financial operations processes. So in terms of access and who's involved, currently our payroll process is a very simple spreadsheet of just payroll change tracking that is shared between finance and people, where anyone who's aware of any changes that have taken place in the month, we've got a template for specific types of changes like new joiners or leavers or bonuses. And we simply enter those changes into a spreadsheet. We have a couple of key stakeholders tick off that they have approved and agree with this change and that the information is accurate. And then at the moment, the finance team take that information and use that to review or input changes directly into Pento. They'll give it a thumbs up, and then I hop in. I am able to run a payroll report straight out of Pento. I will just be able to sense check variances, review it against our original checklist of changes that have been made, and go in and have a one-click approval on payroll. And I can do that right up until, if I wanted to, 1 minute to midnight, the night before payroll is going to run. If there was a last minute change we needed to put through, I'm able to do that. So that's definitely kind of hugely sped up and add a lot of comfort to our processes.
Is there just on that, but is there a benefit of you running Xero alongside Pento, or is that kind of a slightly minor benefit, i.e. within the Xero ecosystem, how much does that impact you? Or is it, because I know there's a direct integration potentially from Pento, how does that work?
Yeah, so we use Pento as a bank feed directly into Xero. So we're able to see per employee the payment that has gone out. So, I mean, the payments aspect is something that we haven't really touched on yet today, but it's a huge growing pain, is importing BACS files into your banking software and hoping that it all goes through and that you don't get an error code that spits the batch back to you. That's all handled in Pento as well. So when those payments go out, that appears as a bank feed. We currently rec all of that to effectively a suspense account, and then we have a payroll journal that we post once a month that splits it out into our preferred kind of cost allocation across our chart of accounts. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think there's another question in the chat that just alluded to kind of, if you move to something like a Pento, I mean, I use PayCircle, there's, Employment Hero, there's lots of different ones you could look at for outside of Xero. They were asking whether if you move from Xero payroll, say, to those, does that mean do they work on a standalone basis? And the answer is yes, effectively. I mean, we obviously are talking about it in the context of a Xero ecosystem, but actually, yes, you have an integration, but it's a standalone tool. Same with PayCircle. That's my understanding. So that gives you that also accounting software agnostic in a way, if you should you have to move on your accounting software.
And then just to answer Nathan's question as well around Xero users seeing it. So in my businesses, the only Xero users are typically the finance staff who would already have access to payroll information. And so access to the Pento bank feed within Xero would, yes, provide information about how much those employees are being paid, but it would only be seen by people in my context who would already have access to that information and are involved in those processes.
Amazing. I know I'm conscious of time. as is the sign when it's a great and rich discussion, the time just flies by. So I'm going to quickly come to each of you, if I may, for your top tip when it comes to scaling with Xero. So Sabrina, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, my main one would be identify what your complexities are. Like, understand where the greatest value add is going to be for your business to have a bolt-on system. That's going to change depending on who you are, what your business is like. It could be anything from, you know, whether or not you're handling microtransactions, whether it's revenue recognition, billing, payroll, but understand where, you know, where in your business from a finance perspective needs additional investment, and focus on those areas as ones where an addition to Xero's native functionality could really extend the lifetime of Xero.
Amazing. Dave, over to you. Your top tip when it comes to scaling with Xero.
Yeah, so I would say before, you know, whilst using Xero or thinking about even moving on from Xero, ensure that you're, to be kind of vague, but be more specific in a second, harnessing the connectivity that it has. So one element of that is it has a really good open API. Of course, if you don't understand what I'm even talking about, then go and sort of maybe do a little research on open APIs, but look at software like Geocon. Or, you know, there was a software called Datadeer where I started this sort of journey to tap into basically the open API in a non-technical way into Excel. Geocon's a really good way to do this as well. To bring data from Xero and then repurpose it elsewhere into reporting, etc. And then the other side of that, obviously on the back of the sort of connectivity of Xero, the quality of the integrations and the huge marketplace that it has of apps that allow you to, you know, extend, grow and scale with Xero without having to move into a dedicated ERP. It means you can basically hand-pick the technology that best suits your needs in multiple areas of your business without having to go and look at a clunky, you know, ERP system, very expensive, and, you know, there are needs and use cases for those, as we talked about, but try and avoid.
Amazing. And Beth, you know, bring us home.
Mine would actually be, I think, sort of quite a tactical one, which is, I think, when you get into kind of multi-entity in kind of one sort of like way of thinking of complexity, but also just having lots of departments and teams, and you wanting to have much more rich data, typically you feel like Xero, the tracking category function, perhaps isn't going to enable you to be able to kind of pivot your data on a number of, on as many different kind of angles as you would like. So my kind of top tip for scaling with Xero is build an incredibly detailed and reflective of your actual business chart of accounts as early as possible, and continue to build out a very detailed chart of accounts. And then when you're plugging in all of the different kind of marketplace solutions that are available within the Xero ecosystem, you are just able to leverage so much more value out of those tools, whether that's reporting or whether that's simplifying your payroll journal process or anything along those lines. So that would be my kind of my main top tip, is dive in beyond the out of the box Xero chart of accounts as early as you can, and keep that evolving to be reflective of your business. And then everything else becomes more powerful.
The reason I'm smiling is across this series, it's not the first time we've had a shout out for chart of accounts and investing in the time in really giving it some thought. So it's always great when you get these surprise insights.
It's like your foundations, isn't it? Like if you're building a house, like it really is your foundations. I totally agree, Beth. It'll be the first thing I ever do with any business I take on, which is look at the chart of accounts, review it, start from there.
Yeah, a recurring theme. Take the time to invest in your chart of accounts, and your future scaling self with Xero will thank you for it. Amazing. So that's been brilliant. Just to quickly highlight what's coming up over the next few days. So tomorrow we've got Manage Complex Manufacturing and Inventory Processes with Kerry Baker-Biggs from BookCheck, Matt Flanagan from Bluehub, and Amber Chaff from Unleashed. We've got Optimize FX Rates and Automate Reconciliation with Chris Carter from Eventrise. John Toon from Beaver and Struthers, and James Scobie from Airwallex. And then we've got Automate and Enhance Accounts Receivable with David Rowland from Energize, Vicky Ellis from Not Just Numbers, Joe Wood, Virtual FD, and then Chrissy from Chaser. So for those who haven't yet registered, please do. At the link there below, enterprise.getmayday.com. And I've got to say massive thanks to our panelists who've been so proactive in answering a lot of the questions that have come through today. So all I'm left with is one final residual question to put to you, and that is, when it comes to who needs to be involved in the choice of payroll system and how it interacts with the HR function as it scales. So I guess there's two elements to this: who needs to be involved in the choice of it, and then who needs to interact with it on a day-to-day basis. So I think, Beth, I might come to you first, and then oh no, Sabrina won the battle to unmute first, so I've stood aside. So Beth, I'll come as planned. I'll come to you first, and then to Sabrina.
Yeah, I would say it's a shared people and finance tool. You want to get alignment across both teams, and you want to make sure that the payroll solution that the finance team perhaps are suggesting is going to play nicely with the HRIS system that the people team have put in place. So ideally it's shared, because then you can play around with who owns different aspects of the process. It's something that you may want to change roles and responsibilities on payroll as you scale and as your teams evolve, and perhaps some teams have more or less capacity at different times. So ideally it's something you're pretty aligned on, but ultimately if you know it's going to be finance owned, then make the decision, in my mind, with what works best for the finance team, if they're the ones going to be doing the heavy lifting day to day. Amazing.
And then Sabrina, any final thoughts to add to that?
Yeah. We typically see that in more complex variable worker businesses, it can be as low as one dedicated payroll person, as in that's actually their job per 300 employees. In more kind of white collar professional industries, typically you wouldn't have a dedicated person until maybe about 500 employees, as in someone who's focused on payroll and things, other kind of finance tasks like AR and AP. But what we typically see is that it really is a shared responsibility. 50-50 coin toss before you get to that point, whether the main responsibility sits with HR or finance. You really need both sides of the systems aligned on this. Anything that touches employee benefits, obvious financial impact, but huge impact from a HR perspective as well. Yeah, do not go and change one of these systems without speaking to the other half. I'm sure you will have many intercompany mutinies if you try and do so. But it really is a shared responsibility until you're at quite a significant scale.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much to our incredible panel of Beth, Sabrina and Dave for taking the time to share your insights today. I've learned a huge amount from it about, just sort of understanding the warning signs of when, your kind of payroll process is in need of a step change. So, Beth's kind of the payroll cut-off date keeps moving forward. You're incurring more and more sort of ad hoc fees for your payroll charges from your outsourced payroll. And understanding the need to understand your complexities around both payroll and as a more sophisticated Xero user, and whether and how best they can be addressed within the Xero ecosystem. So huge thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you everyone who has joined us for today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you over the course of the rest of the series. Thanks very much.